Awakening to the deep feminine and the soul. In this talk, I'm speaking not as a Jungian analyst, nor as a historian, but as a woman who some 40 years ago had a visionary dream. That dream led me to write 2 books on the feminine archetype and what happened to it in patriarchal culture. In the dream, I came round the side of a huge dolmen, rather like the ones at Stonehenge, and I saw in front of me a huge expanse of green corn or green wheat, just at the stage it is now in the month of May. And I found myself skimming over the surface of that field for what seemed miles and miles, until I came to a dip, and I hesitated, wondering, should I go any further? And then I saw that there was an enormous net stretching from one side of the valley, as it were, to the other, maybe about a mile across. Each end was held by a man, a very tall man. And I found myself suddenly trapped like a fish in the meshes of that net. I was lying on my back, looking up at the black starry heavens above me, for day had changed into night. I saw the figure of a woman whose body reached from earth to heaven. She was naked with long flowing hair, but neither young nor old. She had a great wheel in her abdomen, like the labyrinth in Chartres Cathedral. I looked down at my own body and saw that I too had a wheel, similar in shape, but mine was on the left, not centered like hers was. I realized that my body was an exact copy of hers, except for the position of my wheel. She indicated that I was to center my wheel. That dream changed my life path. I had to find out who she was and what she wanted by giving me this stupendous vision of herself. 40 years after that vision, I have found out who she was and why I had that visionary dream. And I can answer the question, what does the feminine mean? What does that word mean? As I've defined it in my book, The Dream of the Cosmos, it stands for a totally different perspective on life, a totally different paradigm of reality, and for the values which reflect and support that paradigm. It stands for a new and conscious relationship with the earth and the cosmos, and the arduous creation of a new kind of civilization which honors that relationship and those values. Drawing on the deep feminine for action in the world invites the recognition that we live within a sacred order and that we have a responsibility to the cosmos to protect the life of this planet and all the variety of species on it, instead of exploiting them for the benefit of our species alone. Awakening to the values of the deep feminine would fulfill Einstein's wish that we should change our mode of thinking. Now, Jung said that the world hangs on a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man. And by that he meant the psyche of the individual, whether man or woman. Each one of us who awakens to the feminine strengthens that thread. Once upon a time, the feeling for the sacredness of life and relationship with the cosmos was a deep instinct, shared by much of humanity, as I explained in my first talk. Then, almost imperceptibly, it was lost. For millennia, a tremendous problem has been troubling the waters of the soul. It is this: in a civilization which is still patriarchal in organization and outlook, which has been structured by a male image of God presiding over religions and institutions created entirely by men, and by a polarizing mythology which glorifies power, conquest, and the mastery of nature, how can the long silenced voice of the feminine, the voice of the soul, be heard? Centuries of conflict between nations, religions, and ethnic groups have brought us to the present time when we must find a way of moving beyond our archaic patterns of behavior or risk destroying ourselves as a species. Can we embrace the truly immense transformation of consciousness we will need to make if we wish to forge a viable future for our children and our grandchildren, and for the planet itself? There was a wonderful man called Thomas Berry, who died a few years ago, who lived in California. He was a theologian, and he said this: "To attain peace among the nations in any dynamic or enduring form requires not simply political negotiation, but a new mode of consciousness." So he also was calling for a new mode of consciousness. The magnitude of this change is in the order of religious conversion or of spiritual rebirth. A change is needed in every phase of human life. Now, I think that something comparable to an annunciation is taking place in our time, all over the planet, presaging this new spiritual birth in human consciousness, an awakening to a more complete vision of reality, a better relationship with the planet. Like the magma of the Earth's core, the long repressed and ignored feminine principle is rising to meet the masculine one in response to a deep soul instinct to balance and marry these two archetypal principles within ourselves and also within the world. Awakening to the feminine requires a receptivity not only to the events occurring in the world, but to the long ignored voice of the soul that speaks to each of us below the threshold of consciousness, speaks to us through dreams and through visions, through intuitions, and through its longing for relationship with us. Now, in the Renaissance, this awakening to the feminine was, as it were, anticipated in the many beautiful paintings of the coronation of the Virgin, showing her being honored by Christ as he crowns her as his bride. This painting invites the marriage of the two great archetypal principles and the two long separated lunar and solar ways of knowing, where the feminine is recognized and honored as the essential and beloved partner of the masculine. That's my favorite painting. It's in the National Gallery here. Sometimes you have this painting with the sun and moon under the feet of Christ and the Virgin, which brings together the lunar and solar principles. Where can we find the first signs of this awakening to the feminine? In 1942, Henry Moore did this drawing, which shows a group of people gazing up at a shrouded figure, their smallness dwarfed by its towering height. Beneath the shroud and the ropes which hold it in place is a feminine shape. This drawing suggests that a new archetypal image of the numinous was emerging from the collective unconscious, waiting to be unbound, unveiled, waiting to be recognized and received by humanity. Henry Moore did many, many sculptures of reclining women or women and children, very beautiful ones. I think there's one here in this garden, yeah. But I think the most powerful trigger for awakening, two triggers really, were Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, which was published in 1962, followed a few years later by the astronauts landing on the moon in July 1969, which gave us the breathtaking view of the Earth seen from space. 500 million people watched the Apollo landing and listened to Neil Armstrong's famous words. In the space of a few hours, our planetary eyes expanded to cosmic eyes. Our relationship with the cosmos and our perception of ourselves was utterly transformed. The fact that it was the moon that was being explored, age-old symbol of the Great Mother, the feminine and the soul, was in itself significant. But it was the sight of our planet from the moon that lifted us beyond national allegiances and opened our heart to a feeling of belonging to the cosmos. For the first time, we became visually aware of the exquisite beauty and fragility of our blue planet and knew it was our home in the vastness of the starry cosmos. This awakening was also presaged in the fairy tale of the Sleeping Beauty. And it's not by chance that this is one of the best-loved fairy tales, passed from generation to generation for many centuries, because it describes a profound truth. The whole court of humanity lies asleep under a spell. The feminine principle waits in the castle of our inner life, waiting to be redeemed from its millennia-long trance by the figure of the prince, who alone can penetrate the hedge of thorns, who has the courage to penetrate it. that guards and conceals it. The prince stands for the questing human spirit who is looking for the lost feminine counterpart of himself. Knowledge of the holy unity of life, reverence for nature, trust in the powers of the imagination, recognition of the presence of the invisible, recovering the atrophied faculty of intuition. All these are needed if the prince is to penetrate that hedge of thorns, awaken the sleeping beauty, and free the entire court of humanity from the spell of the past and move to a higher level of consciousness. Into the fifth dimension, apparently, is what we're called to move into now. Recovering the lost sense of a profound relationship with life. In this story, the hedge of thorns that had defeated many previous suitors opens before the prince who is destined to reach the inner room of the castle of the soul. The hedge of thorns is the inheritance of the beliefs, whether religious or political, that were imprinted during the solar era and which represent the greatest obstacle to the recovery of the lost treasure of the soul. The fact that we are on the verge of destroying the earth and each other is the direct result of living for so many centuries in ignorance of our most profound need to know that our lives are rooted in the life of the soul, and beyond that, in the life of the earth and the cosmos. So I've just put here a few of the things that need to change and the issues that we need to focus on. First of all, arms sales and the sacrificial rituals of war, the desecration of the body wherever there is rape, torture, or murder. Secondly, the oppression of women and her portrayal as a sexual object. Previously, she was portrayed as womb, really, being only serving man's seed to bring forth new life. But now she's really regarded as a sexual object for men's pleasure. And that's what we have in pornography and everything else like that. Thirdly, the denial of the effects of climate change on land, sea, and air. Fourthly, the unchecked growth of population, which is estimated to reach 10 billion by 2050, which the planet cannot stand, and neither can humanity, because it's already very, very crowded. So birth control and trying to limit families to 2 children is an absolute prerequisite for any change in the planet as a whole. I would put that almost as primary. Then the hunger and deprived existence of billions and over 50 million refugees now fleeing all over Africa and also obviously from the Middle East. Sixthly, the neglect and sexual abuse of children, and in that is included education, the bad education we give them, which is so lacking in soul and which kills their souls. And they grow up to be bitter people who are really not complete, not whole. And finally, our dominant attitude to nature. So all these really should be on one line because they're all priorities. There's a lovely quote here from Aurobindo, who says, if there is to be a future, it will wear a crown of feminine design. And he said that maybe 50 years ago. The growing influence of the feminine is responsible for the growth of the environmental movement, but for the determination to free women in every culture from their long oppression and encourage their increased participation in society, and for many new approaches to healing both psyche and body. It is reflected in our mounting revulsion, fury even, for arms sales and weapons of mass destruction, and for the outrageous carnage of war, the wanton destruction of the miracle and marvel of the human body, and the helpless victims created by it. It's expressed as growing compassion for the millions who lack food, water, and access to education, and for all the suffering created by our cruelty, including the ongoing sexual abuse of children and the abuse of women through rape and trafficking and pornography. It's drawing thousands of women as well as many men to work together to transform attitudes and oppressive social customs that have prevailed unchallenged for millennia, particularly in the religious institutions that have perpetuated this in these social customs. The many online petitions we are asked to sign on behalf of the persecuted and oppressed are a symptom, I think, of this awakening. I get at least 5 a day. This powerful evolutionary impulse is working a profound alchemy beneath the surface of our culture, drawing men and women together to participate in a process of transformation that is slowly manifesting as a new consciousness, which recognizes the interconnection and interdependence of all aspects of life, their essential but hidden oneness. The arrogant celebration of man's conquest of nature is being replaced by the realization that if our species is to survive, we need to respect and safeguard and cherish the planetary life on which all our lives depend. Now here I'm turning briefly to the oppression of women, because Ayaan Hirsi Ali, whom I enormously admire, has just written another book called Heretic, and calling for the reformation of Islam, just as there was a reformation in Christianity in the 16th century. She says there's an urgent need for one in Islam. She's calling for an end to the horrific practice of FGM, that's the picture below on the left, which ruins the health of millions of young girls, and an end to the appalling treatment of women, which includes their being stoned to death if they're accused of apostasy or adultery or any other misdemeanor that is considered to be one by the community. So these archaic social and religious customs have to go, no matter if Islam is insulted by this, just like the burning women and heretics at the stake had to go. I think the thousands of people who are working on behalf of the planet are like the imaginal cells. Have you heard that expression, imaginal cells? Which are formed in the chrysalis that will become the future butterfly. The dying caterpillar tries to destroy them, but eventually they overcome it and emerge as the butterfly, and that's such a marvelous metaphor for our time. There is a struggle, there is persecution, there is oppression, but all the time that chrysalis is forming into the butterfly. Then the chrysalis falls away. I think as an imaginal cell, it is important not to take too evangelical a stance, but rather to persevere in the goal of trying to introduce new values, new kinds of community, new ways of looking at things, new methods of bringing about change, as Scylla is doing in her work and in how is she teaching us in these days together. We need to recover the consciousness of the early lunar cultures and the great civilizations of the Bronze Age, particularly those of Egypt, India, and China, where the whole cosmos was imagined as a living being, an organic, sacred, and living whole. This world was an epiphany or a showing forth of an unseen source or ground which breathed it into being, animating and sustaining it. Everything was infused with divinity, because each and all were part of a living, breathing, connecting web of life, animated by spirit. So also, awakening to the feminine means defining a new image of spirit, moving away from the patriarchal image of a creator God who is separate and remote from his creation, towards an understanding that creative spirit is immanent in every aspect of life on this planet, as well as in the whole cosmos. Divine mind, therefore, is not something separate from us. We are co-inherent with it, that is, we are part of it, at the very heart of it. And this, I believe, is one of the great revelations of our time, to which there'll be quite a bit of opposition, but we can introduce this new idea through this kind of talk and through other ways as well, without offending anyone, because it doesn't exclude the old image, it just makes it wider, embraces nature as well as a distant creator God. I like this definition by Einstein of the religion of the future. The religion of the future will be a cosmic religion. It should transcend a personal God and avoid dogma and theology. We don't need theology. I think the Dalai Lama said, "My religion is kindness." What more do you need than that? Covering both the natural and the spiritual, it should be based on a religious sense arising from the experience of all things, natural and spiritual, as a meaningful unity. So he got it years and years and years ago. Nobody paid much attention. Now, I'd like to speak at some length about the image of the Shekinah in Judaism, the mystical tradition of Judaism, because my visionary dream led me to her. The Shekinah is the feminine face of God as it was conceived in Kabbalah, the mystical tradition of Judaism, that was called the voice of the dove, or the jewels of the heavenly bride. In the imagery of the Shekinah, we find the most complete description of the feminine dimension of spirit, as well as the sacred marriage between the two aspects of the Godhead that has been lost or banished for centuries in mainstream patriarchal religion, and that includes the Jewish religion. What does this extraordinary tradition offer us? It restores the Bronze Age image of the sacred marriage in the union of the divine Father-Mother in the ground of being. There is not a mother and a father, but a mother-father, who are one in their eternal embrace, one in their ground, one in their emanation from that ground, through all the realms that they create, and one in their ecstatic and continuous act of creation through all the dimensional worlds that they bring into being and sustain. They are the two, as it were, who are sustaining all the worlds. No other tradition offers such a breathtaking vision in such exquisite poetic imagery of the union of the male and female energies in the one that is both. And the Song of Songs was the text most used by Kabbalists in their contemplation of the mystery of this divine union. Even more important, the Shekinah gives us one of the most incandescent, vivid, and powerful images of the presence of the divine in this material dimension of life, transmuting all creation and the apparent insignificance of everyday existence into something to be loved and embraced and honored and celebrated, because this material world of our human experience manifests the divine radiance that dwells within it. So here is an image of spirit that is the invisible ground of the phenomenal world, that has brought this world into being through a process of emanation from the divine ground. There is no separation whatever between spirit and matter, spirit and nature. We could perhaps understand the Shekinah as the hidden intelligence within nature and all life processes. She offers an image of divinity that gives infinite value to life in this world and acts as a bridge connecting the visible and invisible worlds. All worlds are her robes or veils, and she dwells within them as divine presence. So nothing is outside deity. In the radiant light of the cosmic sea that she is, everything is connected to everything else as through a luminous circulatory system, a limitless web of light. Moreover, the Shekinah is deeply devoted to what she has brought into being, as a mother is devoted to the well-being of her child. Kabbalah describes the feminine aspect of the Godhead as mother, daughter, and sister, as well as bride, giving woman what she's lacked throughout the last 2,500 years in Judeo-Christian culture, an image of the divine feminine in the Godhead that is reflected at the human level in herself. And that is what that vision I had was telling me. I was the microcosm of her as the macrocosm. Clear as day. She couldn't have spelt it out in words more clearly. The Shekinah is divine motherhood, named as mother of all living, the title that was also given to Eve in Genesis. So women can know themselves in their role as mothers and in their care and concern for the well-being of their loved ones, and beyond these for the whole of life as the instinctive custodians of her creation. So that's what we are, the custodians of her creation. So what about sex? The sexual attraction between man and woman and the expression of true love between them was seen as the enactment or reflection at this level of creation of the divine embrace enshrined at its heart with the words, "I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine." So human sexual relationship enacted with love, mutual respect and joy is a sacred ritual that helps to maintain the ecstatic union of the divine pair. It's a lovely idea. What a contrast this is to the sinfulness of sex in the Christian tradition and to the way the facts of life are taught to our children in schools. This is something that could be changed, maybe. Two of the titles of the Shekinah are Divine Wisdom and the Holy Spirit. That goes back to the wisdom books of the Old Testament and also the Apocrypha. As a cosmic entity, she is the radiant ground or the light body of the human soul, our soul, at once its deepest essential ground, its outer garment, the physical body, because she's also brought that into being through the process of evolution on the planet, and its animating spirit or consciousness. We are all divine sparks of her being. She is the holy presence of the glory of God within every one of us, and all of us, moving from unconsciousness and ignorance of this radiant ground to awareness of and relationship with it, live in her being and grow under her guidance until we are reunited with the Source, discovering ourselves to be what in essence we always were but didn't know ourselves to be, sons and daughters of God. What I discovered as I read these texts is that even after a distance of 1,000 and more years, because they were written down in Spain in the 12th or 13th century, their words offer the most vivid and powerful imagery of the immanence of spirit, that's the presence of spirit, in the life of this planet. They seem to transmute all creation and the apparent insignificance of our lives into something precious and sacred, to be cherished and celebrated, because with life we see here and experience here is the manifestation of the divine ground that has brought us into being and contains our world within itself. This deeper understanding of life also radiates from the magnificent passages in the books of Proverbs and Ben Sirach, where wisdom speaks as the Holy Spirit, calling on humanity to listen to her. Unknown and unrecognized, she says she is working within the depths of life, within the depths of nature and our nature, yearning to open our hearts and minds to her presence, her justice, her compassion, and her truth. It seemed to me as I read these passages that I was listening to the voice of the Shekinah, speaking to the souls of humanity, who are the scattered sparks of her divinity. By the way, these texts can all be found on my website under Seminar 13. If we were able to speak to her, what comment would she pass on the pathological effects of our ignorance, the pollution of her earth, her seas, her air, the wanton sacrifice of precious human lives in war, the use of explosives to destroy flesh and bone, the agony of orphaned, abandoned, and maimed children? And what of our brutal treatment of animals and the contamination of our food and water with toxins and pesticides that endanger our lives and the life of the bees and the wildlife that are essential to the continuation of life on the planet? To hear her answer, we would have to attune ourselves to her being. We would have to listen with her ear to the voice of the suffering we bring into being by our ignorance of the oneness and essential divinity of life. We would have radically to change our habits of behavior and become more consciously aware that the suffering we inflict on others is actually suffering we are inflicting on her, that she suffers through actions that inflict suffering on the different forms of her life. This is a drawing by my husband, perhaps one of his most beautiful drawings of this presence. He didn't paint it as that, he just did it. If we could awaken to her presence, we would awaken to the sacredness and divinity of life, and we would begin to see matter and our own bodies in a different light. We would treat them with greater respect. If we could awaken to her voice, we could bring matter and spirit, body and soul together, healing the deep wounds inflicted by the beliefs and habits that have separated them. And even as we accomplish this, we would begin to transmit the light and love flowing to all creation from the divine ground. So awakening to the feminine invites us to listen to the long-ignored voice of the soul that speaks below the threshold of consciousness, in dreams and visions and through our deepest instincts and intuitions, and also through the depressions that afflict so many of us, that are rooted in the loss of soul, and maybe rooted in her calling to us and our not being able to hear. I think that's what my depressions were, until I understood what was happening, and then they got much less. The soul communicates mainly through the heart and through our deepest feelings, many of which are ignored or repressed or overridden in our driven and addicted culture. So after so many billions of years, the creative energy of the universe has evolved a form, the planet Earth, and a consciousness, our own, which is slowly growing towards the recognition of its ground and source. Yet because of the loss of the tradition of the ancient lunar way of knowing, physicists do not know that they are part of what they are exploring in the finer and finer gradations of matter they are discovering, nor that these are the outer covering or veil of an unimaginably fine web of luminous and invisible relationships. We need to broaden our concept of our consciousness, to embrace the inner life of the universe and recognize that the universe is alive, conscious, and the eternal ground of our own human consciousness. So I will attempt a definition of the soul in its widest sense. This is the soul as the cosmic sea of being, or the great web of life underlying the physical forms of reality, through which all things are connected to each other. The soul is the source or matrix of consciousness, the invisible Great Mother, once named Anima Mundi, Sophia, Shekinah or Shekinah, Divine Wisdom, Holy Spirit. The soul is not so much in us, we are in the soul. And our physical body is the vehicle of the soul in this dimension of reality. We may be temporary, not having a holiday, but having a sojourn here, and we may return to other realms after our death. So the mysterious statues of the Black Madonna, venerated all over France and in Switzerland as well, and Spain, represent the soul in the sense that I've described it, and the hidden web of life behind all experiences. So awakening to the feminine calls for the arduous creation of a new kind of civilization, one that's based on a more conscious relationship with the earth and the cosmos, and a recognition that all aspects of life are connected with each other, and that our actions and even our thoughts affect the unseen fabric of the web of life. In the words of a poet, "Thou canst not stir a flower without troubling a star." Love that. So here I have the hummingbird nest and the fledgling. This was sent to me by a great communicator in Arizona who has a farm there, and she is a beekeeper. And she sent me this example of how the hummingbird weaves this nest of spider's threads, so delicate that you can't see them hardly. And it weaves the whole nest with that, holds it together, and then it ties it to the branch as well, so that the nest won't be able to be knocked off. It's so extraordinary. So in a way, if we can look at ourselves as in a nest on this planet, held by this hummingbird creative being, I think it gives us an image of being protected. Now, the innate faculties of the divine feminine, or the deep feminine and the soul, are the following. Instinct, that's the most fundamental quality. Imagination, intuition, feeling, emotion, which is really the expression of deep feeling, and empathy, most important. Empathy is a wonderful quality. Now, the highest values of the deep feminine and the soul can be very clearly articulated, I think. They're the values of the heart, which women have always known, and men too, all the men who fought for justice, for human rights, for women, and for their own rescue, really, from oppressive regimes. They have these qualities. So there's wisdom, compassion, love, justice, beauty and harmony, most important to include these, and the instinct to heal, nurture, protect, and cherish that are present in both man and woman. And all these are the values of the heart. So healing the wounded heart of humanity is about cherishing in every sense. Cherishing our own lives as having infinite meaning and value. Cherishing the time given us in order to discover our direction in life and who we truly are. Cherishing the body which has been sacrificed for so long to our distorted image of spirituality. Cherishing the lives of the people who have been given into our care. And cherishing the planetary life which is the greater field of all our endeavours. Wisdom, compassion, love and justice call us to empathic caring, solicitude, insight, gentleness and understanding, but also to strength, power and intelligence used in the service of humanity and on behalf of all planetary life. We need both those sides in our nature, both the feminine and the masculine. So I think there are four great questions that challenge us now. How do we recover our sense of being part of something totally sacred? How do we develop respect and compassion for the life of the earth in all its forms? How do we find ways of meeting the deepest needs of the human heart, starting in childhood, for love, relatedness and connection? That is human connection, parental connection, teacher connection, and love, and not just connection through mobiles. How do we relinquish the beliefs and habits of behavior that have been so damaging to the soul as well as the planet? These are the four great questions that Scylla and I formulated when we wrote Soul Power together. So I think it helps to remember that we're not without guidance, whether from the heart, from our soul, from this great feminine being I've been speaking about, or perhaps from an angelic presence. I love the story of Tobias and the angel shown here because it gives such a perfect description of this guidance. And if any of you have a Bible with an apocrypha, look up the book of Tobit because it's in that. And it's about Tobit's relationship with a person who he calls his friend, but who turns out in the end to be the Archangel Raphael, who's guided him through a series of great difficulties and challenges. It's a wonderful story. That little dog in there is painted by Leonardo, a little white dog. So now moving on to the deeper dimension. This is a man who had a near-death experience when he went a very serious operation in which he nearly died. And he said, "The old paradigm of birth to death represents an outdated concept that is woefully inadequate in defining the unfolding reality of expanded awareness. Materialist science is at the end of its days, as most scientists are changing their views. The old concepts are soon to be relegated to the same dustbin as the earth is flat, as we develop a more mature understanding and transcend old beliefs. The role of the feminine is to bring together things that have been split apart, and one of the things that has been split apart is what happens to us after our death. It's a taboo subject. We've been dying for God knows how many millions of years, but nobody dares talk about the damn thing. Excuse my language. Even though we've all lost beloved partners or children or parents, it's ridiculous. So this is breaking the taboo, getting through the glass ceiling that separated us from this other dimension of reality. So I think that just to define in a very brief outline and a very rough outline, we're here on the plane of Earth, of material reality, which is at a lower electromagnetic vibrational rate than the other dimensions. Then, when we die, we move into the intermediary plane of subtle forms, which is all around us all the time, in this room, with us. The soul world of multiple dimensions, which are at a higher vibrational rate. And finally, the plane of pure light beyond all form, the divine ground, and the angelic intelligences that have brought into being this wonderful cosmos. Each of these levels or planes is continually interacting with the others. They're not separate. We don't move from one to the other, 1, 2, 3. We move gradually through many, many dimensions of those different worlds. And we have different bodies for moving into these different worlds. We have, obviously, a physical body for this world, which functions very well if we take care of it. We have a soul body which is present even with the physical body in this world, called by some a subtle or etheric body, composed of much finer particles than our physical body, and attached to it by a silver cord. This body is weightless and can move freely. It can create through the heart and the imagination and communicates telepathically. And finally, we have a spirit body or bodies called radiant or luminous or shining, composed of ever lighter particles that we enter into as we move closer to the light of the divine ground, ultimately merging with it. So this is something to carry in your imagination, that the end of the physical body is not the end. The soul body goes on into these other dimensions. And it may return here in another life, or it may not. Some people say, my husband says, I'm not going back there to all that suffering. And he doesn't believe in the afterlife at all. And I said to him, well, you're going to get a shock when you see me there. So this is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, whose books you may know. She was writing about 20 years ago. Wonderful books. She worked with the dying and the children particularly who were dying of cancer. And she collected a huge number of experiences that these children were having as they passed through into the other world. And she said, nothing is more important for our well-being than to know that when we die, we move into another reality that is as real and vitally alive as this one. Consciousness does not die with the death of the body. Consciousness is eternal, and we're part of it. So I've added here that we are immortal, and we may retain our individuality after we die. I'm not quite sure exactly what happens, because if we've had many lives, there will be many individualities that may blend together. Can't say how it works yet. I'll write back to you when I'm over there. So there are literally millions of unseen worlds, if not billions, because there are 100 billion galaxies in the universe. So in all those galaxies, there are probably other worlds and dimensions, inhabited by countless billions of souls. And there are no places that are called heaven or hell, but there are states of being which may be compared to these. And it's not what we believe, but how we live our lives here that draws us to the plane that we will inhabit there. So we save and redeem and heal ourselves because we have the innate evolutionary capacity to do so. We're not helpless victims at all. We can take on the role of helping ourselves to evolve further. So we need to dismantle the firewall that reductionist science has constructed to form a kind of prison around us, saying that there is only material reality and that the death of the physical brain is the end of consciousness. Not knowing that we and our loved ones survive the death of the body and move into other dimensions has caused a tragic amount of suffering. It's bad enough losing them, but to lose them forever is beyond belief suffering. The apparent finality of death may be the greatest of our illusions. So here I've got this beautiful image of a bridge connecting these different realities, connecting our world to the other dimensions. I think we're just at the beginning of a new phase of our evolutionary journey. We need to remember that we are galactic beings, cosmic beings, as well as earthly beings. And we need to hold the image of a bridge connecting us to the deeper dimensions of the cosmos. By holding that image, we strengthen the bridge. We create a field, if you like, which strengthens the bridge. And in time, the veil between the dimensions may dissolve, and we may be able to communicate more directly with the beings in the dimensions beyond this one, who are assisting or trying to assist our further evolution. By the way, there's a mass of information about life after death on the internet, and there's a man called, oh dear, who's in Australia, but I think if you just Google it, Victor somebody it is, it will come up. And he's brought together all the material on life beyond death for anybody to look it up. I had a client who lost her beloved husband of an aneurysm, and she was so distressed that she did all this research, and she passed it on to me. And so I've used it in my talks, but it was amazing what she discovered. And it's helped her enormously because she's in touch with her husband. So the image of the sacred marriage is at least 4,000 years old. We hear of it first in Bronze Age Egypt and Sumer, where it's celebrated with poetry and ritual, the sexual union of goddess and god that was believed to assist the regeneration of the earth in spring. We can see it magnificently portrayed in the 15th century paintings of Renaissance Italy, where Christ and his mother Mary sit side by side with the sun and moon beneath their feet. And we can remember it from our childhood in unforgettable fairy tales like The Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella. How can this ancient image speak to us today in this time of crisis and profound transformation? Our most urgent need today is to reconnect mind and soul, reconnect the top part of ourselves with our heart, the two aspects of our nature which have been separated from each other, yet which belong together as bridegroom and bride. Secondly, it is to reconnect nature and spirit, recognizing that God is not other, but simply all that is. Thirdly, it is to reconnect our consciousness with the invisible divine ground that sustains this world. The marriage of the masculine and feminine aspects of our nature and our consciousness with the ever-present divine ground is the prerequisite for our giving birth to a new consciousness within us and in the world to a civilization freed from the horrific mistakes of our past, which have separated God from our world and divided man from woman, religion from religion, nation from nation. The sacred marriage, understood and lived as a new story for our time, could lead us to our becoming truly human, wise and compassionate and ethical in all our relationships with the planet and with each other. So this evening, with the help of the groundbreaking geometry of unified physics, I hope to explore with you how everything is connected, from the infinitesimal particles of matter to the great galaxies of space.